UVA basketball and UVA football show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Funny thing about the NFL season, it consumes us from the heat of late July right through the chill of February, and then it comes to a screeching halt. And we look around and we go, oh, what are we going to do? No games to talk about. No teams to speculate about. Well, there's some NFL stuff to get to. The odds are already out for Super Bowl for next year. Some other issues. But pitchers and catchers did report yesterday in West Palm. And Davey Martinez spoke to the media. We'll have some reaction on that. Looks like things are smoothed over with CJ Abrams. That's among the issues as they head into the 2025 season. Also, Steve Young with an extended interview with Graham Bensinger. Pulled off a few of those comments, and we'll go through them. It's an interesting story, and it's a story that could not happen in today's NFL. This was prior to free agency. This was prior to the days where players could say, I don't want to be here anymore, and this is where I want to go, and they would send him there. But Steve Young, who's in the Hall of Fame, sat for 4 years behind another Hall of Famer in Joe Montana. I mean, you think about that today, oh, my God. That just could not happen. But it did in the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, and we'll do an extended look at Steve Young's comments on Graham Bensinger's show coming up shortly. But as I say, spring training is open, and there was an issue from the end of last season where the Nationals were playing in Chicago, and reportedly shortstop CJ Abrams, one of the bright young stars of the future, one of the best players on the team, spent the entire night in the casino. And the Nationals played a day game at Wrigley Field, and I guess he had 3 strikeouts, maybe he had a walk in the game, but clearly was not 100%, and they had an option to send him down to the minors for the last 3 games of the season, and that's what they did. And Abrams addressed it yesterday. He said, things happen. You got to move forward. We're here now. I'm excited to get going with this team. And as a matter of fact, he didn't even have to be there yesterday because it was only pitchers and catchers working out. But he's been spending time at the facility in West Palm as they get ready for the start of the season. And Davey Martinez, in talking to the media, talked for, about 20 minutes or so. He's saying, yep, this is behind us, and CJ's ready to move on, and so are we.
One thing, CJ, the person, he's a great kid. He really is. He loves to be here. He loves his teammates. What he did in the past is the past. Moving forward, like I said, he wants to come out here and play baseball and be the best shortstop he could possibly be. So I'm excited for him. I mean, as we know, what he can do on the field. So we're looking forward to keeping him healthy and getting him out there and let him play shortstop every day.
Yeah, he's been a bright spot. He had 20 home runs. He's a guy that you want to sign to a long-term deal, but when you have an issue like that, staying out in the casino, that could be a sign of, we don't want to go there. And the Angels now look back to 2019, and they sure as hell didn't want to go there. Remember at the end of the 2019 season, after they won the World Series, the Nationals, and we all said, hey, let's run it back. Let's bring everybody back. This team could win a few of these. They gave Steven Strasburg a monster extension, and he deserved it. He was World Series MVP. Anthony Rendon left, and we went, well, okay. He got $240 million from the Angels. You want to know how bad this deal was? Here's how bad the deal is, or was, or continues to be. At the rate of about $38 million a year, he has played 257 games in those 5 years. He's missed 68.3% of the games that they have played. In the last 421 plate appearances, Anthony Rendon has two home runs. He still has 2 years to go. Oh, and guess what? He showed up at spring training, and they determined that he's got a hip injury that could keep him out maybe for the entire season. What a horrendous deal this was, on top of low performance, such as hitting .218 last year, .236 the year before, and .229 the year before that. He's had off-field mishigas 5-game suspension while on the injured list for participating in a benches-clearing brawl against the Mariners in 2022. Not only is he not playing, he's hurt again, but he's in a brawl with the Mariners. Received a 4-game suspension following a physical altercation with an A's fan following the Angels' opening day loss in Oakland in 23. Opening day, everybody's feeling good. He gets into a physical altercation with a fan. Publicly disagreed with Angels doctors who diagnosed him with a bone bruise during the 23 season, an injury that turned out to be season-ending, adding that he'd been thinking about retiring for the last 10 years. I'm sure the Angels were saying, please retire. He complained that baseball season has too many games during a podcast appearance. Not for him. He hasn't played more than 58 games since he got to the Angels, and said in an interview last year with The Athletic, it's never been a top priority for me, meaning baseball. This is a job. I do this to make a living. My faith, my family come before this job. So if those things come before it, I'm leaving. Maybe the Angels should say, in a not so subtle way, yeah, we think your job, at least for us, comes before your family and your faith. I know that's important to you, but, this is how we feel. So if you'd like to leave, there's the door. There's the door. So, when you look at the contract that they gave Steven Strasburg, which turned out to be absolutely disastrous in terms of that deal, but I would still do it again given what they were facing at the time. He was the World Series MVP, for God's sakes. But 7 years, $245 million. And what did he give him? He gave him like 30 innings or something like that after that, and then retired. They were also, and this is another one of those contracts that I think you look at it differently than Rendon. Patrick Corbin, 6 years, $140 million. And in the last few years of his deal, 21 to 24, he led the National League in losses 3 times and had a collective ERA of 5.71. Not too good, not too good. There's some other ones that are bad. Josh Hamilton got a deal also from the Angels, 5 years, $125 million, and he was terrible with them, and then suffered a drug relapse. Ultimately was traded to Texas, but the Angels were on the hook for 90% of the salary. Miguel Cabrera, great career with the Tigers, 8 years, $240 million. Got that between 2016 and 2023, and he was terrible. Minus 2.7 WAR, 65 homers, 381 slugging percentage. That was sort of a payoff for the career that he had. And then Chris Bryant, who's still under contract with the Rockies, signed a 7-year, $182 million deal, and he has missed 70% of the games since signing. But Anthony Rendon kind of retires the trophy for what they have faced here. And that is not good. That is not a good situation for the Angels, who are on the hook for him for 2 more years, $38 million, and he's never played more than 58 games in a season. And from the looks of things now, if he gets to 58, that'll be a surprise. And also, if you look at it from this standpoint, it appears that he showed up at spring training knowing that he had a hip injury and hadn't done anything about it in the offseason. This was a Shaquille O'Neal move, that he wouldn't address his injury situation in the offseason, would show up for the start of training camp, and they'd say, oh, yeah, Shaq needs surgery, miss half the year. Yeah, he'd be ready for the playoffs, but that's not in the spirit of being a team leader. And Anthony Rendon, anything but, who basically says, this is a job, we play too many games. Great. I'll deal more with the Nationals coming up at 10 o'clock as we got off to a kind of a rocky start here today. Steve Young had a lengthy conversation with Graham Bensinger. They make these into half-hour shows, but they put up the entire interview online, and I pulled some interesting things out of that. So we'll look at the career of Steve Young on what is kind of a pause in sports, start of spring training, yeah, college basketball going on, but NBA is heading to the All-Star break. Hockey's taking 2 weeks off for this international tournament, and football at least is taking a breath before we get into the combine. So we'll deal with Steve Young and what he faced throughout his career as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got a little time to stretch out here and hear from Steve Young. If you don't watch these. They are kind of like filler shows on what is it, Monumental now, where they run the Caps and the Wizards games. And it's a syndicated show. They don't have many of these anymore. But Graham Bensinger, who at one time had a relationship, I believe, with Bob Costas. I think he played like high school baseball with Bob's son. So he got kind of a boost from Costas. But he's carved out this thing where he gets celebrity interviews, and he gets some pretty big names. I mean, he'll get some of the biggest names in sports. It looks like he's got a pretty decent budget, and they do a lot of different things in these interviews. But he put up what we call the Raw interview with Steve Young. There's, I guess, going to be a Steve Young show coming out, a half-hour show that I guess will pop up, whenever you happen to see it. And they went over what is a career that could not happen today. A Hall of Fame quarterback sitting on the bench for another team for 4 years. That's just not possible. But we didn't have free agency in the NFL until 1993. By that time, Young had taken over as the starting quarterback for the 49ers, and Joe Montana had been kind of run out of town, finishing up his career with the Kansas City Chiefs. Can you imagine that, running Joe Montana out of town? But that's the way things worked in those days. And Young had a very interesting career the way it unfolded. Coming out of BYU, he signed a contract with the USFL, the United States Football League, and it was a monster contract. It was a $40 million deal. It was unheard of at the time. And it was based on an annuity, so it was going to be paid out over a long period of time, but it still was $40 million, and it was designed to help put the league on the map. Like, whoa, they're not fooling around here. Steve Young, $40 million. Well, it turned out to be something of an albatross for him, playing for the LA Express. They played in the LA Coliseum. There was like 30 people there. It looked ridiculous. And then the league folded, and his rights went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because they had drafted him. And he had 2 just miserable seasons there. He made 19 starts. He won only 3 games. And finally, he was allowed to get out of purgatory, being sent to the 49ers with his approval. And he went there with the idea that maybe Joe Montana wasn't going to be able to play again. This was 1986, 87, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, he went there in 1987. So he played in Tampa in 85 and 86. Montana had back surgery, and they didn't know if he was going to be able to come back. And he was told, this Bill Walsh, the coach, said, we don't think Joe's going to play again. You come here, you'll be my quarterback. He thought, great, I'll go with Bill Walsh. I'm going to be with a good team. 49ers are a great organization. They'd already won a couple of Super Bowls, 3 of them, I think, at that point. So, why not? And, he wound up sitting the bench. 86, 85, 87, 88, 89, and 90. The most passes he threw in any of those seasons was 101. He played in only 6 games in 1990. He was buried behind a Hall of Famer, and finally got his chance to play. He was an 8-year starter for the 49ers. He had great numbers, and that's what put him in the Hall of Fame. When he was talking to Graham Bensinger, he talked about how he'd grown up idolizing Roger Staubach. He had Staubach's poster on his wall. Even though Young is a left-hander, Staubach's a right-hander, he mimicked the way he gripped the football. He was a runner like Staubach. Staubach was one of the early guys who could beat you with his legs as well as his arm. And then he got the opportunity during his career to meet his hero. And it didn't go completely as he hoped, but he learned a lot from it. This was Steve Young recounting his first meeting with Roger Staubach.
I'd gone to law school, tried to prepare for it, as my dad talked about, the plan rather than the dream, and it was always in my head. And so when I was getting close to it, I asked Roger, what's the advice? And he said, run. Just like that, run. I'm like, run? What do you mean run? He said, you got to run. You got to run away. What you did on the field will never leave. You don't have to worry about it ever leaving you, but you need to run away, because otherwise you'll hang around and that's all you'll ever think about. And I thought that was great advice, and that's what I did. I took my law degree, finished the game, and just started running. And now you're in my office, so.
You remember the first time you met him?
Yeah. Oh, I just threw up in my mouth. Not because I met him, but because of the situation. So we're in 1992 championship game at Candlestick Park. We're playing the new upstart Cowboys, and I need to win this game, like in the worst way. And the Cowboys come out for the coin flip, and I walk out there, and out walks Roger Staubach to represent the Cowboys as an honorary captain. And I'm thinking to myself, I just described to you the impact he's had in my life. I've never met him. And if you can think about that moment for anybody, any of you that have a hero, somebody you look up to that you'd like, if you met him, you'd kind of want to faint for all the impact they've had in your life, that was me. And so there was Roger Staubach. I'm like, and then after we did the coin flip, I'm like, Mr. Staubach, Steve Young, I had my poster up and I was just babbling, you know? And you've been a real hero of mine. And he turns to me and he goes, Steve, you gotta go play. And I'm like, yeah, right, sorry, we'll talk later. But we ended up losing that game. And probably the most painful loss I've ever had in my life.
Really?
Yeah. I think there's no question that was particularly painful. And but yet there was my hero, and we should probably finish the story because after we met, we became really good friends through the years.
By the way, did you talk to him after that game?
Not after the game.
Okay,
no,
right.
I did not see him. But over the years,
Yep.
we got to know each other, and he was always loved the conversation, loved the interaction, loved being associated with me, and I really appreciate that. And so just to close the story out, we're in Canton. I'm going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the induction ceremony. Dan Marino and I are going into the 2005 vintage, and they have a Ray Nitschke luncheon where when all of the Hall of Famers are in the room and no one else can be in the room. No handlers, no secretary, nothing, no assistants, no nothing, just the Hall of Famers. And they're all sitting there waiting for you and then you walk in and it's like every face you see, it's like surreal. Every face you see is the most famous person in football history through the years, all the way back. And I mean, as much as you're used to it by now, you're like shocked.
Yeah.
And then I could see every seat was kind of full, and I wasn't sure where to go where do I sit? And then I look across the room, and there's Roger, stands up, he goes, and he has a spot next to him. And so I get goosebumps thinking about it right now, just the impact, the hero stuff, what he's given to me, and then I asked him to finish your story.
By the way, what about recalling that makes you a little emotional?
I think more than it's just everything. Just you climb a mountain when people are throwing rocks at you the whole time, both on the field and off, right? And every time you make a step, it gets tested, and every taking another step, I'm doing the metaphor, works in my mind at least, to get to the top of the mountain, and there's your hero that you really admired and loved the way he played and loved how the person he was, and then you're at that ultimate moment, sitting with all the Hall of Famers, going into this group of 300 guys, and there's that person that represents. Remember, I was 8 years old. All of that feels. It just feels very emotional. I think there's a connectivity to it. There's an appreciation, and there's just the raw feeling of the journey that I loved and hated, and that was when people say, what's that moment that kind of, that's that, when I remember him, he just, you got your spot right here.
That's part one of the Steve Young conversation. He mentions at the beginning of it the transition from football to the real world, and it was kind of abrupt for him, realizing especially what he went through to get to the point where he could become a starter. The failed USFL, the 2 miserable years in Tampa, sitting on the bench basically for 4 years in San Francisco, waiting to replace Joe Montana, and then finally getting to do it. And then In his second to last year, he had a great year. He threw for over 4,000 yards, 36 touchdowns. He had a quarterback rating of over 100. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the league in his second to last year. His last year, 1999, comes back, and the season ends after 3 games because of a concussion. He was in his late 30s and was advised to retire, and he did. And now he's got to get to the real world. So he's come out of college in 1983. Now we're in 1999. So it's 17, 18 years later, and football's all he's done. He's worked incredibly hard to get to the level that he got to. He was patient. He went through all the pain of Tampa and all that, and then suddenly it's over. And in 1998, he's one of the best in the world, one of the best ever to do this. And then suddenly in 1999, it's over. The transition, obviously, from the top to the bottom, tough.
And you can't do it anymore. It's a death. And you have to, I would say you're a bag of bones at the bottom of the cliff, and you have to figure out a way to start crawling and then walking. And the truth of that moment is that you're not good at anything else, let alone great. And you keep saying, no, I was great. Yeah, but what are you today? I don't know. What are you even good at? And I think that's the biggest challenge in the transition, is to recognize that, heal from the pain of losing your expertise in a way, never being able to replicate it. You never will be on the field again. You'll never take every ounce of your soul poured into being good at something. You'll never, it's gone. Yet, can I transition to something that can be challenging and even sublime and better emotionally, better rewards in some ways, better life? Yes. And the way to do it is recognize that I'm not good at anything else. So the transition, to me, the key was the humility to say, I'm going to try to get into business, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I have to recognize that I'm not even good at it right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that just because they were good at football or basketball, they can walk right into business, and they find out that it doesn't work that way, and they go bankrupt. And then you've heard the old saying that an athlete dies 2 deaths, once when he's finished playing and the next when he actually dies. And I think Young kind of articulates that there. The USFL experience, this is a good story. Playing for the LA Express and, coming out of school, 1983, your options are limited. There's no free agency in the NFL, and salaries are low. They're kept low. Now, we've already had a work stoppage by then, the 1981 work stoppage, where the players got their butts kicked. This was not a successful strike that they had, and they found out that this was going to be something that they were going to have to overcome at some point and try to get free agency, but it was a long time in coming. And so you could either go to the league there or you could go to the USFL, and a lot of star players did. There were a lot of great players that went there and get a great contract as Young got. Now, it's kind of a mirage because the owner of the LA Express was a guy by the name of Bill Oldenburg. Drove around in a Rolls Royce. He was 5'6", and he acted like a big shot. And as it turned out, with a lot of people like that, he was a phony. He was trying to sell you on the idea he was really, really rich, and he didn't have that kind of money. But he was able to get Steve Young to sign a deal for $40 million, might have been even $44 million, and go play for his USFL team. And this is Young recalling what it was like to sign with the LA Express coming out of BYU in 1983 and how things evolved from there. This is, again, Steve Young with Graham Benziger.
It's the early 80s. You sign a $40 million deal. Between the guaranteed money and the annuity, it was supposed to pay out till you were what age? I
think 60. And so, and they added up all the annuity payments for all those years and then called it $40 million. At the time, Wayne Gretzky was making $2 million and Magic Johnson was making $2 million. And then I was making $40 million. That's how it was promoted. And it was worldwide. Japan News, Europe. I was a $40 million man. And I'm like, it's money that you get over 60 years, or 40, 50 years. And so, but I had to, every town I went into to play in the USFL, there was a sign, 40 million, you suck, you're terrible. And it's a great story. My mom, they drove down from Connecticut to Washington, D.C. to see the USFL game. And I did something on the field, fumbled or something, and a chant started in the corner of the stadium where she was, 40 million down the drain. And the chant started to take the whole stadium, 40 million down the drain. And my dad tells the story, my mom's like, she stands up and everyone around her, the guys and everything, and she goes, but it's an annuity. It's not 40 million, it's just an annuity. That's why he sucks. It's not, no, she didn't say that part, but it's just so funny that my life, again, how fast can we spin Steve Young? Let's say it's $40 million and have him try to answer for that in a world where I didn't really want to answer for $1.
Take me into the room where it's you and your agent, Lee Steinberg, actually negotiating that deal with a
Bill
quite
Oldenburg
colorful
was the owner. Yeah. So Bill Oldenburg was the real estate developer. He takes me down to the Transamerica building where Lee and I were going to negotiate the final parts of the contract. Thought it was done. And so we go upstairs and we're getting done, and my dad is, he's a lawyer, so he wants to be part of it, and he says, hey, I haven't read it. And Lee says, look, I don't know if we have time to read it. He's got a birthday party and there's a big hoopla here, and he's like, look, I'm having my son sign unless I read it. So then Lee has to tell him, like, Mr. Oldenburg, we're gonna have a little delay here, we have to. So the delay goes on an hour and a half, and we're sitting in the conference room, just sitting there. And Bill Oldenburg comes in and he was pissed, and he's like, he takes a wad of hundreds, like as big as you can hold. And he goes, you want more money? Is that what this is all about? You want more money? And throws it at me, hits me in the chest with the money, like flying money. And I remember thinking, I've never seen so much money in my life, and I'm like trying to pick it up. And he storms out and has us escorted out of the building by security without the contract being done, because my dad wanted to make sure that he read it. And yeah, that was the richest I ever was, right there.
Didn't he try and throw a chair out of the window?
Yeah, he was trying to break. Yeah, he took a chair and was breaking the window, and he says, he was inflamed.
And you almost took a swing at him.
Oh, that's right. So I'm Mr. Oldenburg. You got to calm down. And he tries to. You want to calm down? And he tries to. I'm like, hey, you need to, because he wasn't the biggest. He's not a large man. And I said, you need to calm down, because if this is not going to go well. That's how bad it got.
Yeah, 5'6", not a tall man. Bill Oldenburg is 5'6", and Steve Young's like 6'3", and a great athlete. Yeah, sure, that was going to work out well. The amazing thing about that story to me is, after all that, he still signs the deal. I guess $40 million in 1983 is tough to walk away from. So he wound up, playing in the USFL and then the NFL. But that's really a remarkable story about how crazy things were. And here's a guy comes out and somebody throws a wad of cash at you. That's kind of a warning sign. And maybe, as they say, hindsight is 20/20, or as Steve Spurrier said, 50/50. But you wonder after something like that, maybe you should have gone to the NFL just to see how that was going to work out, even though it was a lot less money. And I guess the lure of $40 million is tough to walk away from. But boy, that's nutso. That's just crazy. Comes out of the room and throws a wad of $100 bills at him. Speaking of the money, this is now we fast forward to Steve Young in San Francisco, and this is the years 87 to 1990, those 4 years where he sat on the bench, didn't become a full-time starter for San Francisco until 1991, and he had a tough time dealing with it. And here's how he dealt with it. This is an amazing story. This is how Steve Young dealt with being a backup in San Francisco.
Backup quarterback was like, I spit it out of my, I just didn't, she said, oh, you're the backup quarterback. Anyway, that's how I handled it, and didn't handle it well. And I think part of the frustration was, what, this is the immaturity and stupidity of me. I was like, I'm not going to cash my checks. You know what? I'm just going to let them sit in the drawer, because I'm not playing, so it doesn't matter. And I was renting a little room from Harris Barton, my teammate, and I went back to law school in the off season. And Carmen Policy called me and said, general manager of the team, and said, hey, look, you're screwing up the taxes. Where's the checks, man? We got to file. It's April. We got to file. And I forgot I'd left them in the drawer in Harris's house. So I called Harris. I go, Harris, would you go into my room and just see if they're all in there? And Harris, he tells a funny story. He goes in there and he's like, 16 checks, pretty big checks. She's like, what are you doing, man? And I go, do me a favor.
You remember for how much?
I was, it was good money, man.
$4 million you just had sitting in your dresser drawer.
So I said, do me a favor, man. Would you gather them and send them to me? Because I gotta. Back then there was no, you couldn't take a picture of it or anything. And so he sent them to me. We got them. I finally gave in because of the audit for the 49ers.
A couple of things. Okay, he mailed $4 million in checks from San Francisco, I guess, to Connecticut, where Steve Young lived. That's where his family's from. Wow, that's something. The other thing is, this is the early 90s, late 80s, right? And I remember when you went to buy a house at that time, because I did, interest rates were like 14%. You know what kind of money he could have gotten in the bank if he just deposited those checks in some type of savings account? I mean, $4 million at that period of time? And how much he threw away by having those checks in the drawer, that shows you the real frustration that he had and how little he could do about it. Nowadays, you got a guy, you go, hey, I'm not playing, get me out of here. But in those days, he was stuck, and he had agreed to the trade to the 49ers. He was under contract to them. And even if he hit free agency, there's nowhere to go. You couldn't move in those days. And it wasn't until 1993 that free agency kicked in. So just think about that. Keeping $4 million worth of checks in his buddy's drawer of a dresser in his house. Crazy. All right, finally, we get to 1991. Now, remember, at the end of the 1990 season, the 49ers are going for three-peat. They won the championship in 1988. They won it again in 1990 when I think they beat the Broncos 52-10, something like that. And they're playing the NFC Championship game at home against the Giants with a backup quarterback in Jeff Hostetler. And the 49ers were leading, and Leonard Marshall delivered a hit to Joe Montana that was so devastating, he missed the entire next season. That's how bad it was. And finally, at the start of the 1991 season, Young wasn't able to win the game after Montana got knocked out. Giants went on to beat Buffalo in the Super Bowl. The next year, finally, the 91 season, Young is the starting quarterback. And as he recounts here, it's awkward because even though Joe Montana's not playing, he's rehabbing that year from an injury, he's still on the team. He's still around. He's already cemented himself as the greatest quarterback in the history of the franchise, and I think at that point was acknowledged to be, if he wasn't the best of all time, he was right there with Johnny Unitas. That's how great he was. And so Young is now finally getting his chance to start, but it's an odd situation. It's not like Joe Montana, was traded or retired. He's still there, and Young is replacing him. Here's his recollection of that.
Replacing Joe, trying to be Joe. What I realized very quickly is that if you're a fan of the 49ers, when Joe's not on the field, their only memory is Joe never threw an incompletion, never threw an interception, and never lost a game. And here comes this guy, which all he does is throw incompletions, throw interceptions, and lose games. So it's like this, it's all overwrought anyway. It's insanity. And I'm in the middle of the season. The Gulf War had broken out in the Middle East in October of 1991. And the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, it was the Gulf War. It's Steve Young's fault. Because it was funny, right? It's funny. But for me, living this out, I felt like I was in the bottom of a hole in depression and victimization. Like I'm invested in success here, and it feels like other people aren't, and everything's my fault, and I got to that, and that's when I took off to, my brother was in the medical school at the University of Utah, and so let me go see my brother, walk around town. And he goes, Steve, I got 3 kids and no money, man. I know it's hard for you, but it's hard for me too. And I was like, look, you're not helping me. And on my way home, that's when I ran into the great Steve Covey, who said, I told him all the terrible things that were happening in my life, and he said, Steve, let me ask you a couple questions. Eddie DeBartolo, and I told him how great he was. Bill Walsh, I told him how great he was. And Joe Montana's on the team. I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. He goes, but if you had to ask him questions for mentorship, could you do it? I'm like, yeah, I could. He goes, Steve, I travel the world looking for platforms for human beings to have the ability to iterate and get better and find out how good they can get. And I can tell you, in traveling the world, I've never seen a better one than the one that you have. And I realized then, at that moment, literally at that moment, it became crystal clear to me that the hole that I was in the bottom of, I dug. The victimization that I felt was self-inflicted. And I had just lacked the perception and the perspective to see the opportunity. And I raced from that plane flight home and never looked back.
Wow. So that's what kind of launched him into the greatness that he had. He had some, unbelievable seasons after that, and finally winning the Super Bowl after the 1994 season, where he threw 35 touchdown passes and 10 interceptions, and the famous shot that NFL Films got as he was completing the blowout of the Chargers, and he's asking his teammates to remove the monkey from his back. And in the locker room, he holds up the Super Bowl trophy. He says, "They can never, never, never take this away from me." That's not just a quarterback who had climbed the mountain. That's a guy who had negotiated a really rocky road to get there, and how he felt about that. All these years later, realized Joe Montana played his last game in San Francisco, I believe, 1991. Steve Young played his last game there in 1999. So we're more than a quarter century removed from all of this. In the case of Montana, more than 30 years. And even to this day, as Young says, there is awkwardness between the two of them, as he explains.
Joe's a good dude, and he is. The reason why Bill put us together, Coach Walsh, because he knew we both weren't toxic personalities. We got along. We played golf. We laughed. We did a lot of things together, but it was always awkward. Yeah. There's a great commercial AT&T did a few years ago called Awkward, where Joe and I come to Bo Jackson's house, and he comes in unannounced, we have this weird interaction. And that's really, it's been awkward. It's always been awkward, and I think it'll always be awkward because we both wanted to be super successful, and there's only one job, and yet we never argued. I never had a cross word with him. We never had it out, because there's nothing to have out. It's just awkward.
Joe had the best 2 years of his career, back-to-back MVPs, and at that point, you've been in the league and his backup for how long?
2 years. That was both those years.
So
I was like, Bill, he's not only not hurt, he's never been better.
So at one point, both your dad, which says a lot, and your agent Lee say, time to move on. What was it that made you go against your most trusted advisors and stick it out?
It was a tight one. I've always had what I believed was kind of a conversation with heaven going on in my life. And that conversation felt bilateral, and I think
Meaning what?
Meaning that I felt like I'd get answers from, like I would, in the conversation that I would have ongoing in my life, I would get I'd feel like a sense of, direction or peace or something. And I just, for whatever reason, I wanted out. I was the one that had Lee Steinberg go figure out how to get me out of here. Like, I got to get out of here. I can't take it. It's crazy. I don't want to just watch. It's just nuts. My career just going by, and I'm just standing here. And then when it got really right down to it, we had to make the decision. I believe it was the Raiders.
Al Davis had guaranteed you'd be the starter from day one.
And it was the spring of 1991, and something about I just felt like, no, I've invested here. There's something about I want to stay, and that's when it turned for me too. So I don't know what to tell you, Graham. People say you're inspired. Like I don't want to minimize it by using things that people don't. I want people to appreciate that there's a ongoing conversation, and it can be, kind of important ways to live your life that I found, and that was one of them right there.
You ever wonder how life would have been different had you?
Oh yeah, if life would have been different if I played in Tampa the whole life, or if I would have not gone to the USFL and been drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals with the first draft pick, or been to the Raiders in 1990, or, but I got to tell you, my life is so uniquely guided in many ways by my experiences through working through and being around Bill Walsh and his abundant spirit, and Joe and his excellence and like amazement, and then my opportunity that like sharpened my saw so that I could, like, look, the 49ers and the West Coast offense had a tactical advantage until Mike Holmgren left in 1992 to the Packers, and then he took it. Then they came back and attacked us. But it was a place for quarterbacks. It was a place. I'd been in Tampa. I'd seen the other side, and so there's a part of me that's like, look, this place is a place for quarterbacks. It's a place to find. To Steve Covey, if you're gonna ever find out how good you can get, this is the place to find out, and it was really true. And so, unfortunately, I had to wait 4 years to do it. But I'm grateful I hated those 4 years and loved them at the same time.
Yeah, it's these journeys are so fascinating. You know the Doug Williams story. If you don't, Doug Williams was a first-round draft pick coming out of Grambling in 1978. Joe Gibbs was on the staff at Tampa Bay, and he did a lot of the legwork and scouting him, and he convinced management to draft him in the first round in a period of time where drafting an African-American quarterback was unheard of, especially in the first round. But he was a great player in Tampa. He took him to the NFC Championship game in 1979, continued with the Bucs, who didn't spend money on the offensive line. Hugh Culverhouse was really cheap. You didn't have a salary cap, but you also didn't have a salary floor. So there wasn't, a minimum amount of money to spend. And Doug Williams got the crap beat out of him. He was not just the lowest paid starting quarterback in the league. He was one of the lower paid quarterbacks in the league, period. He had enough. He walked away from football. I think it was a full year. Didn't play at all, I think, in 1983. Winds up in the USFL. Has great numbers there. The USFL folds. Nobody's interested in signing him except Joe Gibbs. And he says, all I got is a backup here. Jay Schrader finished up the 1985 season very strong after Joe Theismann broke his leg. He's going to be our starting quarterback. Williams goes, well, I don't have any other offers. Comes to Washington. He's the backup for Schrader, who has a great year in 1986. They get the team to the NFC Championship game. They lose to the Giants 17-0. But he's, his first full year as a starter has taken them to the NFC Championship game. Looks like they're going to have a long run with Jay Schrader as the quarterback. And at the start of the 1987 season, here's Doug Williams in his mid-30s at this point, and he realizes he doesn't really have a great future in Washington, and he makes it clear he wants out, and Joe Gibbs is ready to accommodate him. Al Davis liked him. He was ready to trade him to the Raiders, and the deal was done. The deal was going to be made. And I don't know whether it was a premonition or what it was, but at the last second, Gibbs said, nope, you know what? Sorry, Doug, I have a feeling that you're going to help us this year, and I'm not going to trade you. And Williams was angry about that. He was not happy. And the 1987 season starts. I think it was either the first or the second game. Jay Schrader gets hurt. Williams comes in. They have a strike for 3 games. The Scabs play. They all come back, and they kind of alternate back and forth for the rest of the year. Schrader gets benched. Then Williams gets benched. Finally, in the last game of the season, Schrader's benched for good. Williams is the starting quarterback. He wins 2 playoff games, and then they win the championship, beating Minnesota. It wasn't really great in the playoffs, and then in the Super Bowl was spectacular. He had that unbelievable second quarter, and that's where his name was really made. But, sometimes you look back at these things and, what if Steve Young goes to the Raiders and the Raiders don't have the team around him nor the coaching staff that he has in San Francisco? He doesn't have a Hall of Fame career. He plays more maybe for a year or two, but it doesn't work out like that in the long run. Doug Williams gets traded to the Raiders. He's kind of a footnote in history, right? And I guess ultimately they would have had to replace Jay Schrader too, and Jay Schrader wouldn't have taken that team to the Super Bowl. So, you look back on these things and you do a lot of what ifs, and the what ifs can make you crazy. They really can. And I think the story of Steve Young is one of the more interesting ones in the history of the league, and I think he's one of the brighter people talking football. Somehow ESPN chose not to bring him back. But he does a lot of stuff with Dan Patrick and stuff, and I think he's outstanding. Outstanding. Baseball is back. Pitchers and catchers yesterday in West Palm. Full squad workouts next week. First exhibition game, week from Saturday. Do you know when opening day is? Not for the Nats, although that's pretty early as well. I think that's the 27th of March. Opening day is the 18th. It's one of those international games. I forget who's playing, but give me the old days. It would start around the 15th of April. Washington always opened up the season along with Cincinnati, and everybody else waited until day 2. But there's money to be made. There's games to be moved all over the world, and that's the way it works in 2025. Better get used to it. Comments from Davey Martinez as he welcomed what he said were players who are ready to go. They showed up in shape. They've been working out at the team facility for a while. Obviously, there's always optimism on day one of spring training because, everybody has a 0-0 record. That's the way it works. But the reality is, in an era where you have $200 million plus payrolls, Washington's payroll is low. It's about $60 million. That's not really competitive when you think about 26-man roster at $65 million still. When you think of Juan Soto, who's got a $726 million deal or whatever it is, this is what you're up against. And in their division, where the Mets are spending money like crazy, the Phillies are spending money, the Braves are spending money very wisely, signing these guys to long-term deals, you're just not really in the same ballpark. Tom Libero's got a column about this today. It says another season hamstrung by low payroll. He says, we're now into year 2 of the fantasy that Nationals owner Mark Lerner peddled to team announcer Dan Kolko in an interview at the end of the 2023 season. Quote, we are totally in on building this back to where we expect to be, to where our fans expect it to be. It's his call, meaning Mike Rizzo, the general manager. It's his call as to how he wants to fill the holes in the lineup. He comes to me when he is ready, whether it's a player or a free agent or whatever. Whatever he decides, he has the resources, and he's always had the resources since the day he took over to build a winner. Well, this is what Livero says. The Nationals front office wanted to add some power, maybe 60 home runs to the lineup at first base and DH. One of their prime targets was first baseman Christian Walker, the Arizona Diamondbacks Gold Glover and slugger, who hit 26 home runs, drove in 84 runs and 479 at-bats. The year before, Walker hit 33 home runs and drove in 103 runs. Washington was in on Walker, according to sources, and their talks with the free agent had progressed well. But when it came time to put up the money, those, quote, resources weren't there. Walker signed a 3-year, $60 million deal with the Astros. They did trade for Nathan Lowe, a former Silver Slugger winner and Gold Glove first baseman with Texas, in exchange for reliever Robert Garcia. He's a solid addition to the lineup. Hit 16 home runs, drove in 69 and 565 plate appearances. Those are not Christian Walker numbers. Gold Glove, okay, they got a first baseman. DH, Josh Bell, likable guy, very likable guy, played well here, but he's coming off a part-time role in Arizona where he hit 19 home runs, drove in 71. He's a national special, as Livero says, 1 year, $6 million. Last year was Joey Gallo, 1 year, $5 million. And Gallo, by the way, his batting average was below 200 most of the year. More from Livero. The Lerner's demoralizing discount financial practices go beyond the playing field, where the 26-man roster has a payroll of $65 million. Washington is in the bottom third in spending in nearly every category. Supposedly, the owners claim they are losing $100 million a year, yet Major League Baseball brought in a record $12.1 billion in revenue last season. Someone is making money. And, he talks about the division with the Mets and the Phillies and the Braves. And he says, this is Libero wrapping up the column, it requires a commitment to compete far greater than the Lerners have been willing to make. Yet Mark Lerner has insisted on hanging on to the team in a split among family members who want to sell, sources say. You've heard that Lerner is the only one among his family. He is the managing partner, so I guess he's got the most say, but other family members say sell the team. As Tom writes, he's 71, not in good health. I don't quite understand the reluctance to go all in on the dedication to win, or in his own words, the, quote, resources to build a winner. So they have not spent money, but Davey Martinez is a good soldier as the manager. It's an unusual circumstance in that he was the manager of a World Series champion, and he's been around for the rebuild and continues to be around for the rebuild. And is obviously at this point in the year selling sunshine.
It's been great. I've been here for over a week now, and to see all the guys that have been here and coming in and working out every day, it's been awesome. It's a testament of where this game is going, where they're at. They take it to heart when we tell them, hey, day one, you need to show up like, we got a game that day and be ready to work and do the baseball activity. They're all ready. I watch guys throw, their arms look good, guys running, they look good. So I'm excited about this group. As I always said, this young core of guys that we got, these are the guys that we really feel could be here for a long time. We made some unbelievable acquisitions, that's going to help us this year. So with those veteran guys and the young core that we got, I think this year we're going to have a really good year.
Well, one of the reasons that these guys are going to be there for a long time is they're still under team control. They don't hit free agency, like CJ Abrams, who's apparently smoothed things out after that end-of-season incident last year where apparently he stayed out all night before a game with the Cubs and then showed up with no sleep and struck out 3 times. They sent him down to the minors at the end of the year. So he's going to be under team control. And they did trade for Nathaniel Lowe. Okay, that will be helpful. And Josh Bell is back. But, the outfield is young guys. James Wood and Dylan Cruz are both under team control for I think 6 more years. And Jacob Young is a young player. So those guys are going to be around. They did sign Keibert Ruiz to a contract extension, which was team-friendly at the time, $50 million, but he has been disappointing since he signed that deal as the number 1 catcher. So when it's kind of double-edged. These guys are going to be around for a long time. Well, yeah, because they can't hit free agency and the team isn't spending any money. As far as competition for jobs, where it does seem like the outfield is set with Cruz and Wood and Young, there are other positions across the board where he says it's wide open.
Yeah, honestly, I don't see anything locked in right now. It's like I said, it's day one. So my big concern is, as I always say in spring training, is get them through spring training, get their work in, and make sure that we break camp healthy. I love our depth right now. I mean, we got quite a few guys that could help us in that rotation, which is awesome. So moving forward, I think we're going to be in good shape. But I also like the fact that, some of these guys that came up last year, they got their feet wet a little bit. They got some experience so that, we're going to see them, in their first full year, which is definitely going to help them out a lot too, as well.
Well, some pitching circumstances involving injuries that are going to be something to keep an eye on. Josiah Gray is coming off the Tommy John, and we'll get to Cade Cavalli in a moment. But the reliable starters that they have at this point, Mackenzie Gore, Jake Irvin, Mitchell Parker, who was a surprise last year. They did re-sign Trevor Williams, and Martinez, is going to bring them along, but bring them along at a rate that's it's a little bit different.
The biggest thing right now, as we're at right now and watching the pitchers, they're all. I mean, I was here, and some of these guys threw a live BP already. I mean, they threw live, so it's like, whoa, But these guys are engaged; they're ready to go. So we don't really want to slow them down. We want to manage their workload is what we're trying to do. So even though they're out there and they're throwing, they're only throwing 15 pitches, 20 pitches, and we'll build them up. So it's hard to slow guys down in this day and age. They get ramped up and they're ready to go. So and I love that about them.
Yeah, they're ramped up and ready to go, and then they get hurt, and that's the story of pitching in this part of the century. Cade Cavalli is another one of those guys. He came up at the end of 2022 and has pitched 1 game for them, and then had the Tommy John surgery. And so he missed all of last year recovering from the surgery that he had the season before. Now he's sort of ready to go, but they're going to be cautious with him. And here's something to think about as you listen to what Martinez says about Cade Cavalli. Remember 2012. Steven Strasburg came up 2010 sensation, one of the greatest debuts we've ever seen. He made 12 starts in 2010, then needed the Tommy John surgery, did come back before the end of the 2011 season and made 5 starts, and then came 2012. And I don't think most people expected the Nationals to be in the playoffs. They didn't seem to be ready at that point. It was a year away, at least. And so they started him right at the beginning of the season. And he was on a pitch count, and he pitched really well. He had a terrific season in 2012 as they won the division. He made 28 starts, but the pitch count came up, and they had to shut him down. And to this day, if you want to stir up an argument, you could probably do it, suggesting that it would have been a better idea not to shut him down, and maybe they would have won the World Series in 2012 instead of waiting 7 years later to win it in 2019 or winning a second one, somewhere along the way. But that's the way they did it. They stuck to it. They said, we're not going to go past that. He pitched 159 innings in 2012, and they shut him down. And over the course of the season, the question was asked, well, if he's on a pitch count, why didn't you start his season later so that he would be available for the postseason? Why don't you, start him like close to the All-Star break or something like that? They didn't do it. This is Martinez on Cavalli and the timetable. And listen to what he says about end of season, which to me indicates that this is a change in thinking. It's a guy coming off of Tommy John on a pitch count. Not that they're going to contend this year, barring a miracle, but it's a pitch count that, as Martinez says here, would involve him finishing the season. This is Martinez on 24-year-old Cade Cavalli.
Cade is great, doing great. He really is. He's healthy. We're going to manage his workload. We want him to, when he starts, we want him to finish the season. So we don't know where that's going to be, but we're going to manage the best we can manage his workload. Because he's another guy that we have a tremendous amount of talent, him included. But if something comes awry or whatever, we know that when we get him built up, he'll be ready to finish the season with us. So that to me, that's awesome. So, but he's in a good place. Like I said, he had a great winter. He looks good. We know that, he's going to be limited in how many innings he pitches this year. So we might want to make sure that when he does get out there, we have him for the whole season.
See, that's different. That's different. And had they used that philosophy with Strasburg, who knows how history would have played out, right? Now, a little difference here. Cade Cavalli didn't pitch at all last year. Strasburg did make it back to pitch, make 5 starts before the end of the 2011 season. So, in other words, he came up in June of 2010, made 12 starts. I think it was sometime in August that they shut him down, and he had the Tommy John surgery. And he did not pitch again until it was a full year. It was a full year after he had the surgery. So he didn't come back until August, or maybe, must have been mid to late August of 2011. And then 2012, he was fully ready to go, but it had a pitch count. So as you got closer, and that was a raging controversy that season. Like, hey, look at the Nats. They're going to wind up winning the division. And they're going to win the division without one of their best pitchers. He had a terrific year. He had 28 starts in 2012. And, they stuck to it. They said, nope. And, they had no idea what would happen down the road because, even as Strasburg and Tony used to call him the orchid because everything had to be perfect or he'd get upset and then he was hurt all the time. But he made consistently 25 or more starts over the years. And then in that season when they won the World Series, 2019, he didn't miss a start. He had 32 starts. He was healthy all year. And he was fabulous in the World Series and the playoffs. And throughout the playoffs, he was World Series MVP. And they gave him a $245 million extension. Scott Boras had played it perfectly. He signed what seemed to be an under-market value contract a few years earlier, but it had an opener just right in time at the perfect time. It had an opener at the end of the 2019 season, which they used to open up the deal. And then he got that contract extension, which nobody was kicking and screaming about. I certainly was not. They were World Series champions. And I thought, yes, he deserves it. If they're going to be a good team for the years to come, he's only like 28, 29 years old. It did not seem to be a bad deal. and it turned out to be one of the worst deals in baseball history. But again, I think you have to look at it through the prism of history, and if you look at it that way, it was the right thing to do at the time. Not long term. No, it was not. But at the time, it was the deal. Now he's retired, and I guess I don't know how the contract is worked out. I guess he's still on the books. Part of that $65 million payroll, I think a big chunk of it is the Strasburg deal, which has 2 years left to go. And he's not taking up a roster spot, which is what he was on the 40-man roster while he was rehabbing the last couple of years. But, that's a big chunk of what is already a low payroll compared to the contending teams and the three of the four other teams in the division minus Miami. Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.